Okay, so as some people may have seen before, we were previously reading behind this is the old Chase Bank building. We were previously reading this book behind the old Chase Bank building, but due to being told we cannot be behind there, we was behind there for rain purposes only. Nobody want to read behind the back of the old Chase Bank building, but for rain purposes, we were behind that building. However, we were told we can no longer be in that space, so we have moved to the front of the building, which is public property. This is on a sidewalk. In the back, we were on what is considered private property. So here we are in the front of the building on Front Street, and we are going to continue with reading Locking Up Our Own by James Forman Jr. Again, we want people to understand and to know what we are doing here is the ongoing teaching at Say Their Name Square. This street is part of Say Their Name Square. This is one of the sidewalks you have to take to get to the memorials that are located at one end of 2nd Street and East State Street, and then another one at the other end of 1st Street and East State Street. So all of this area Say Their Name Square, so we are going to actively read in all areas of this space. And so this is by James Forman Jr. We're on a public sidewalk, and we're going to begin here. Okay. To understand how an unarmed black jaywalker could end up dead, he argued. To understand how an unarmed black jaywalker could end up dead, he argued, it was essential to see that white officers treated black neighborhoods as the Wild West. As a result of this mentality, the white cop believed that he must always get his man and bring him back alive or dead, regardless of the magnitude of the alleged crime. Okay, and then I want to reference that back to things that we face in Rockford right now. Just in October 2nd, 2020, Tyrus Jones was shot in the back while he was running away. And again, to understand how an unarmed black jaywalker could end up dead, he argued, it was essential to see that white officers treated black neighborhoods as the Wild West. As a result of this mentality, the white cop believed that he must always get his man and bring him back alive or dead, regardless of the magnitude of the alleged crime. On top of that, Lewis wrote, white officers had a macho mentality that made them ashamed to call for backup, even as a strategy for de-escalating tensions and resolving the conflict with less than deadly force. Lewis's solution changed the racial composition of the police force. A killing like this would not have occurred, he wrote, if the Washington police force was not permitted to patrol the so-called ghetto streets like a foreign occupation army and leave the city to go back to their snow-white suburban homes. Black cops will make a difference, Lewis concluded, because black policemen do not shoot black jaywalkers. Okay, and so there's some fallacies in this argument, but there's also some fundamental truths within this argument as well. And one of the fundamental truths is when he speaks about if the Washington police force was not permitted to patrol the so-called ghetto streets like a foreign occupation army and leave the city to go back to their snow-white suburban homes, some of those killings would not occur. And that's still a very prevalent thing that's happening. 80% of the police departments, 80% of the police officers on the Rockford Police Department do not live within the city of Rockford. So again, they're not part of this community. They get to go back to their snow white suburban homes, and they get to occupy these areas of our city like they do the west sides of the city or the southeast sides of the city. Lewis's piece was published in 1968 at the height of the Civil Rights Revolution, and one part of this revolution was the spread of campaigns for the hiring of black police. In the past, such campaigns had largely taken the form of prolonged efforts waged by the black elite, but now a new pattern had emerged. Across the country, ordinary black civilians were actively protesting their treatment at the hands of the police. These protests often turned violent, and when the unrest ended, the demand for more black police was often at the top of the black community's reform agenda. In Harlem in 1964, for example, a white New York Police Department lieutenant shot and killed James Powell, a 15-year-old black boy, exasperating the long-simmering animosity between the majority black community and the majority white police force that patrolled it. For 6 consecutive nights, the neighborhood was seized with violent protest. Harlem's congressional representative, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., provided Mayor Robert F. Wagner Jr. with a list of demands that included the immediate assignment of a black police captain to Harlem. The demand wasn't new, but the unrest forced the city's hand. On August 14, 1964, Lloyd Seeley became Harlem's first black precinct captain. The next year was Watts, a majority black neighborhood in Los Angeles that erupted in riots. A white California highway patrol officer stopped a black man for reckless driving. The suspect survived the encounter, but there were allegations of excessive force during the arrest. Word of the incident spread through the neighborhood, and soon Watts was in flames. The death and destruction were horrific. 34 dead, more than 1,000 injured, almost 4,000 arrested, and $40 million in property damage. As in Harlem, long-suppressed issues were forced to the surface, and once again, police racism loomed large. Watts was two-thirds black, yet his police precinct only had 7 black officers on its 205-person force. And those black officers, like their counterparts everywhere else, faced rampant workplace discrimination. Los Angeles' leading black newspaper, The Sentinel, assumed the same position as... We're gonna let this go by. Okay. In the riot's aftermath, the calls for more black officers grew in both number and volume. NAACP Executive Secretary Roy Wilkins cited police problems as a major cause of what happened in Watts. He urged more Negro policemen on the force, an expanded public relations program, and more promotions of Negro officers. At a particularly well-attended Los Angeles Police Commission meeting in 1966, everyone seemed to have an opinion about the reforms that were needed. The Ministers' Council of Watts proposed increasing the number of integrated patrol cars and installing a black captain in Watts. The 82nd Street Improvement Club suggested abolishing the oral test for new recruits on the grounds that it discriminated against black applicants. And the Commission on Human Relations called for racial integration of the LAPD's top echelons. By the late 1960s, black citizens were not the only ones pushing for more black officers. White officials at the highest levels of government had joined the fight. The most prominent call for black officers came from President Lyndon Johnson's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice, chaired by Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach. In The Challenge of Crime in a Free Society, the commission concluded that the relationship between the police and the community is so personal that every section of the community has a right to expect that its aspirations and problems, its hopes and fears are fully reflected in its police. 1 or 2 token black officers was not enough. If there is a substantial percentage of Negro officers among the policemen in a Negro neighborhood, many residents will reach the conclusion that the neighborhood is being policed, not for the purpose of maintaining law and order, but for the purpose of maintaining the ghetto status quo. In 1968, the Kerner Commission, known formally as the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, and convened to address the riots and violence devastating American cities, would reach the same conclusion. The racial disparities of police departments were stark and undeniable. In the 28 departments that provided data, blacks made up just 6% of the workforce, even though the cities were, on average, 24% black. The commission approvingly cited the testimony of Patrick V. Murphy, the reform-minded police leader who had recently been appointed D.C.'s Director of Public Safety. One of the serious problems facing the police in the nation today, Murphy said, is the lack of adequate representation of Negroes in police departments. I think the police have not recruited enough Negroes in the past and are not recruiting enough of them today. Black nationalists, who typically had little good to say about the Johnson administration, seconded the Katzenbach and the Kerner commissions, called for more black officers. D.C.'s Black United Front, whose leadership included not only Stokely Carmichael, but also future city council members Doug Moore and Sterling Tucker, developed a police reform platform that demanded the immediate prohibition of all white police patrols in the black community. Other planks called on the city to cease all promotions in the police department and upgrade present black policemen, and fire police chief John Layden immediately and replaced him with the black man. The BUF believed that the black community should be policed exclusively by black officers. White officers, they wrote, should be assigned downtown directing traffic and helping old ladies to cross the street. Marion Barry, the future mayor of D.C., joined the effort. Barry's disdain for the MPD was well known, as he said at a news conference in 1966, back when he was an organizer for the D.C. chapter of SNCC, "The people in this city are tired of Gestapo cops who break into their homes illegally and arrest them on flimsy charges." Barry believed that only black control of the police would change how the department treated DC's black citizens. In 1969, he became even more determined when in confrontation with the police officer over a parking ticket turned physical. Berry was hospitalized after spending part of the night in the hospital and the rest of it in jail. He emerged to find a crowd of 300 citizens who had gathered to protest his arrest. With dry blood on his shirt and a bandage on his head, Berry told the crowd, "This shows me that the black people need to control the nation's Capitol Police Department. The police are like mad dogs." So it came as no surprise that when D.C. began a major police recruiting campaign on black radio stations, Berry became his public voice. He took to the airwaves, offering $50 to anyone who referred a candidate to the force, provided that the candidate passed the MPD's entrance exams. The campaign paid off. In 1976, a survey of D.C.'s black police found that 30% of the officers had heard about the job from the radio. Berry's on-air appeals were part of a national trend. In Michigan, Bill Cosby recorded ads and visited the state numerous times to recruit black officers. Detroit, at the time, was 45% black, with a police force that was only 12% black. In Philadelphia, boards urged residents to cop in, don't cop out, and to join Police Commissioner Frank Rizzo's team. Recruitment efforts reached all the way to Vietnam, where the U.S. Navy's in-house newspaper ran ads featuring Bunker Bunny, a Bikini Clan model. "Hey, big fella," she beckoned. "Bet you didn't know that gals like me are big on the fuzz, did you?" "Well, it's true. We all dig those handsome brutes in blue who sport the shiny silver badges in big cities like Washington, D.C. I'm not their soul brother or friend. I'm a policeman." Officer Prince George's County, Maryland. The warning signs came early, but few paid attention. As the recruitment effort took root, evidence emerged that black officers might have a more limited impact than many had hoped. The most important reason for the disappointment was this: blacks who joined police departments had a far more complicated set of attitudes, motivations, and incentives than those pushing for black police had assumed. The case for black police had always been premised on the unquestioned assumption of racial solidarity between black citizens and black officers. Whether it was Reverend King declaring that black police would represent the race, or Afro columnist John Lewis asserting that black policemen do not shoot black jaywalkers, advocates had supposed the black police officers would, at the very least, identify with the populations they policed. But what if King and Lewis were wrong? Unfortunately, there was reason to think that they just might have been. In San Diego and Philadelphia, for example, black citizens were hostile to black officers, contending that those officers were as harsh or harsher than the white ones. Researchers who had ridden with both black and white officers corroborated that belief, concluding that the black officers were just as physically abusive as their white counterparts. Even in the Cottonback Commissions, The Challenge of Crime in a Free Society, the clarion call for more black police was accompanied by a detailed report noting that, in some places, low-income Negroes prefer white policemen because of the severe conduct of Negro officers. Okay, so I want to take some time to get into that. So already we have went through this chapter, and this chapter is called Representatives of Their Race, and it's speaking about black people being integrated into police departments and police forces across the nation, and it's speaking about the clamor that it was for these people to be integrated into these institutions, because the community as a large and at whole thought that if black police officers could become a part of this institution, then maybe some of the corruption and exploitation that was happening and degradation that was happening because of these institutions would lessen. They thought that maybe if it was a black person that was in the police that was policing these communities, that they would be treated with more dignity and treated with more respect because of this person understanding their plight. However, they are telling you very early on this was something that was found to be untrue. This was something that was found to be not factual and not grounded in concrete evidence. And so, again, that fast forwards us and gets us to 2021. So when you speak to someone now, when they say, well, maybe we need more black police officers, and that's the problem, or maybe we need a better relationship between the police officers and the community, we have to understand that these things trace back so deeply that there is no having a good relationship with the police officers in the community. There is no such thing as putting black people into these institutions and them all of of a sudden becoming anti-racist. It doesn't happen that way. It's a very popular saying that goes, the individual does not manipulate the system manipulates the individual. And that is exactly what happened when they started integrating these police forces. Yes, it might have been a time where the police force was 100% white, and that led to miscommunications and misunderstandings of culture, which led to oppression and exploitation and assault on the hands of the police department. But once they even integrated 5% and 10% and 15% and even upwards to 20 and 30% in some of these departments, the system was still the same. So once these black people got into that system, they just adjusted to the system. They did the same things that their white counterparts did, sometimes even worse, because they were trying to advance farther. And everybody knows the old cliche that if you are black, you got to do 2 times the work to get half as far. So if a white officer got to beat the hell out of 10 black people to get promoted to lieutenant, a black officer gonna have to beat the hell out of 20 black people to get promoted to lieutenant. And that's exactly what was going on. That's exactly what was happening. It turned out that a surprising number of black officers simply didn't like other black people, at least not the poor blacks they tended to police. In 1966, the University of Michigan's Donald Black and Albert Rees led a team of researchers who rode or walked for weeks with black and white officers in Boston, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. What they found was disturbing. Though black officers were not as prejudiced as white ones, a significant minority of black officers still expressed anti-black attitudes. The researchers classified 28% of the black officers working in black precincts as highly prejudiced or prejudiced. Many of these black officers sounded like Klansmen. One told the researchers, "I'm talking to you as a Negro, and I'm telling you these people are savages, and they're real dirty. We were never rich, but my mother kept us and our home clean." Another said, "There have always been jobs for Negroes, but the fucking people are too stupid to go out there and get an education. They all want the easy way out." Of course, most black officers didn't share those views, but even those who saw themselves as pro-black, or at least not as anti-black, engaged in aggressive tactics against black citizens whom they saw as a threat to law and order. In part, their conduct reflected class divisions within the black community. When some blacks, usually middle class, demanded action against others, usually poor, many pro-black officers responded with special enthusiasm. This is what James D. Bannon and G. Marie Wilt found in 1973 when they studied black officers in Detroit. Bannon and Wilt wanted to know how blacks on the force compared themselves to their white colleagues. Without exception, the black officers believed they had a better rapport with black citizens and did a better job in black neighborhoods than white officers did. They cared more about black communities. In particular, they were more concerned about protecting black neighborhoods from crime, violence, drugs, and disorder. So while they were less likely than whites to use excessive force, at least according to their reports to the researchers, these officers freely admitted to being markedly more aggressive about responding to such low-level infractions as drunkenness and loitering. Other research indicated that a form of black pride was at the heart of aggressive policing. In Kippert's 1957 study of Philadelphia's police force, black officers indicated that they were embarrassed by black offenders. When asked, "Do you ever get discouraged at the large amount of Negro crime?" one officer responded, "I feel it personally. I was coming home in a streetcar the other day. I was in street clothes. Across the aisle, a colored man and a white man were sitting together. The colored man was drunk. He was pushing all over the white man, knocking his packages off his lap, just wouldn't stop. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. Everybody was watching. I felt it was a reflection on me. Know what I mean?" A black NYPD officer expressed a similar sentiment to researcher Nicholas Alex as he described his interaction with the young black suspect. "I wanted to give this kid a lesson in civil rights. I take him into the precinct and take my gun off and tell him that I will beat the living hell out of him. He starts to cry and tell me that he doesn't fight his race. I tell him that he doesn't know that he is killing his race by doing things like that." A few black officers rejected the notion that race was at all relevant to the performance of their duties. As an officer in the D.C. suburb of Prince George's County, Maryland, said, "Sometimes we'll be cruising down the street and a group of black teenagers will yell, 'Hey, soul brother.' So I get out and explain that I'm not their soul brother or their friend. I'm a policeman." The notion that black officers would represent the race or treat black citizens differently ran into another problem as well. For many black officers, as early as the 1960s, the question of being pro-black or anti-black was beside the point. They were not joining the force with dreams of becoming a warrior for or against the race. They were signing up because they needed a job. When Nicholas Alex interviewed hundreds of black NYPD officers in 1964 and 1965, they couldn't have been clearer about their motivations. Police work was a good job, stable, secure, with good benefits, and most blacks chose it for that reason. One black officer told Alex, "I was broke. I can't honestly recall any grandiose dreams of being a big fellow in blue." Another said, "I looked around for the highest paying non-professional civil service job available. I took the test for the police, fire, sanitation, and correction. I passed all the tests, and the police was the first I called for." These explanations would have been familiar to officers like Bertell Jefferson, Tillman O'Brien, and Owen Davis, who have faced the Jim Crow job market. There were fewer employment barriers for blacks by the late 1960s and 1970s, but they had hardly disappeared. The stability of a police job was especially appealing to blacks trying to navigate an uncertain and often discriminatory private sector job market. As one officer told Alex, "I couldn't take the layoffs. I had a wife and a baby to support." The officer pointed out that policing came with another perk, the chance to rise in the force. "The police job is the best job I ever had in terms of much more money," he said, "and much more opportunity for advancement." Another said, "You could plan on your income because it's steady. Prior to this job, I had 9 or 10 small jobs. They would lay you off. You went from one job to another. Small jobs and not very steady." Not only did police work look good by comparison with the rest of the job market, for most officers it was a step up from what their parents had achieved. As Eugene Beard found when he studied the backgrounds of black DC officers in the early 1970s, most black officers were both better educated and better paid than their parents. The most common father's occupation listed by the black officers was unskilled laborer. There is nothing wrong with seeing policing as a source of stable employment or upward mobility. But the fact that so many blacks joined the force for these reasons undermined the theory that integration would change police practice. After all, most new black officers saw policing as a job, not as another front in the civil rights movement. Expecting them to change how police fought crime was like expecting black firefighters to change how the fire department fought fire. At the same time, the limited job market for black officers made it less likely that they would do what many reformers hoped they would, buck the famously powerful police culture. The few who tried paid a high price. Finally, although police work paid decently, it didn't make the officers rich, and maintaining wages and benefits was a constant political struggle. These realities would influence which battles black police and their unions took up in the 1980s and beyond. Even those black officers inclined to use their political capital to fight police brutality would often find themselves in the minority. Most of their colleagues, black or white, wanted to fight for wages, benefits, and an equal shot at promotions. Okay, so let's go into what we just were reading right then, and that is them addressing the issue of black people becoming police officers, not because they wanted to drastically change the standing of black people in America or in their personal cities, but because they needed a job. And since they needed a job, once they got into the police department, it became very unlikely that they were going to do things that would ostracize them from their coworkers, and then that would lead them to being back in the unemployment line. And that is something that still resonates today, because these things are very generational and are very cyclical, and so that cycle continues today. Where let's say that even is a black person who becomes a police officer for that specific reason. Imagine being the one black officer trying to do that change within that system, within that institution, and imagine the dangers that it represents. Imagine the inhibitors that you will have while doing that. Okay, so now you can understand again when people ask us these questions about, well, what about having more black police officers? It's the problem that we don't have enough representation on the black police force. No. But black people being inserted into the police department will not change the way that police officers go about their day-to-day business any more than a black fire department officer being inserted will change the way that people fight fires on a day-to-day, on a regular basis. So we have to move beyond this idea of representation, and we have to move to the idea of revolution. We have to move beyond the idea of reform, and we have to move to the idea and to the notions of revolution. And until we do those things, we will constantly find ourselves in this same cycle, asking ourselves these same questions, looking for these same answers, and the only difference will be the form of the caste system that we are in. Bertell Jefferson was sworn in as chief on January 13, 1978. The exceedingly brief ceremony, only 5 minutes, was in keeping with Jefferson's understated persona, but it offered little opportunity to reflect on the day's significance. D.C.'s first black mayor handing the reins of law enforcement to his first black police chief. Indeed, Mayor Walter Washington never mentioned race during the ceremony. Perhaps he thought that the symbolism was too self-evident and powerful for words. Jefferson has struggled for 3 decades against unfair hiring and promotion practices, and his most impressive accomplishment as a young officer was the study class that led to his own promotion. Jefferson never forgot his up by bootstraps history, not even as chief, and he was determined to remedy the decades of the discrimination as best he could. As he put it later, I hope to provide growth opportunities previously denied to African Americans and other minorities to make them ready to replace me as chief or capable of becoming chiefs in other departments. Since black officers already constituted the majority of new recruits by the time he took over in 1978, Jefferson tackled the promotion process, the last barrier to black advancement. His stance was exceedingly popular among the MPD's black officers, a majority of whom listed career advancement as their top concern in the 1974 survey. Nearly every officer who responded to the survey had identified the small number of black supervisors as a major problem. Even though the department had begun recruiting more black officers, 2/3 of the respondents to the 1974 survey said they trusted few or no whites on the force, and even greater majorities claimed they faced discrimination in work assignments and promotions. Okay, I want you to think about that. In 1974, these are black people who have been integrated into this policing institution. These are the black people who are the American exceptionalism applies to. They have risen up. They have individually risen up past some of the hindrances that black people collectively in community and as a community have dealt with. And this is what they are encountering as part of this police force. Even though the department had begun recruiting more black officers, 2/3 of the respondents to the 1974 survey said they trusted few or no whites on the force, and even greater majorities claimed they faced discrimination in work assignments and promotions. 2/3 of the black people that were on the police force didn't even trust the people that they were working besides, but they want the people in the community to trust them. Think about that logic. Luckily, Jefferson had the benefit of a favorable political environment. Many black police leaders have faced tremendous obstacles in bringing about the hiring and promotion of a non-trivial number of black officers. Jefferson, on the other hand, was able to work with the black mayor and a majority black city council that unanimously endorsed affirmative action. The former SNCC activist and gun control advocate John Wilson was especially tireless, using council oversight hearings to demand that the department move faster to close racial disparities in the supervisory ranks. And so Jefferson succeeded Isaac Fullwood, who became D.C.'s police chief in 1989 and later served as the head of the U.S. Parole Commission, called Jefferson the all-time affirmative action person. He broke it wide open, said Fullwood, who credited Jefferson for his own success. I stood upon Jefferson's shoulders. He blessed me with opportunities that were previously denied to us. Fullwood was not alone. More than 20 senior black police leaders, including chiefs in Atlanta, D.C., New Orleans, Charlotte, and Maryland's Prince George's County, can trace their careers back to Bertell Jefferson. But that's where the celebration ends. Throughout the 20th century, America's metropolitan police forces were collectively the targets of 2 distinct campaigns for racial equality. Those that sought to end discrimination within police forces, and those that sought to end brutality and discrimination by police against the black community. Ultimately, in practice, these goals were often unrelated. While Jefferson proudly grabbed the baton from the previous 2 generations of activists who had campaigned for equality within the ranks of the MPD, and even as he fulfilled those activists' wildest dreams on that day in 1978 when he became chief, he assumed a harsh stance when it came to responding to crime in poor urban areas. Unfortunately, this part of Jefferson's agenda would cause great damage to the black community. During an interview for a profile celebrating his swearing-in ceremony, Jefferson told an ominous story. Once as a child, he'd been hanging around near a group of other black boys, and all of them got picked up by a white police officer. The other kids have been shooting dice, but Jefferson had merely been playing with the football. Still, the officer took him to his parents. What did Jefferson make of the incident almost 50 years later? He could have wondered why the officer had picked up an innocent kid in the first place. He could have asked whether the policing looked the same in white neighborhoods. These would have not been revolutionary questions. They've been on the table for more than a century. As far back as 1887, the Washington Bee had complained that prejudiced white policemen take a great delight in arresting every little colored boy they see on the street who may be doing something not at all offensive, and allow the white boys to do what they please. Now think about that. That is a quote from 1887. From 1887, and that is still applicable in 2021 to the issues that we are facing. That is a quote from 1887 from Washington that is applicable to 2021 in Rockford, Illinois. As far back as 1887, the Washington Bee had complained that prejudiced white policemen take a great delight in arresting every little colored boy they see on the street who may be doing something not at all offensive, and allow the white boys to do what they please. And that is picture perfect to the manner in which the West Side is policed, and how many young black boys have had criminal records over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years for being pulled over for being black in a certain neighborhood and having their cars illegally searched and having weed or some type of drugs on them, and then being stuffed into this criminal justice system, as opposed to the white kids that live on the other side of town that don't have as many police officers occupying their neighborhoods, so they are free to drive around with drugs or whatever other illegal things that are in their car, illegal activities that they take place in doing, and they don't deal with being pushed into that criminal justice system. They don't deal with being prosecuted and persecuted at the same percentage rate as black people, for no other reason than the fact that black people are black and police officers are in their neighborhoods because they are black and are pulling them over for being black, and then they face discrimination in the justice system because they are black. But no, the moral Jefferson drew from this story was not that the white officer had been wrong to pick him up, but that he, the football-tossing black boy, had deserved it. I've always been taught, he said, that if you yourself are not actually engaged in some wrongdoing, if you're with the crowd, you're just as guilty. Any doubts about where Jefferson stood on matters of criminal punishment would be put to rest shortly thereafter, when he was faced with the decision about whether to support mandatory minimum sentences for drug and gun offenses. This debate, the subject of Chapter 4, would divide the city and ultimately be resolved by voters in a citywide ballot initiative in 1981. But Jefferson was not conflicted. He was a staunch supporter of the legislation to toughen criminal penalties. In a letter to the city council, he said that mandatory minimum penalties for drug selling would serve as a deterrent and weapon against drug sellers in the battle to rid the city of illicit drugs. In his support for mandatory minimums, Jefferson was acting in line with what most black cops wanted. In 1970, the National Council of Police Societies, the largest and oldest national organization of black police officers, urged its members to move against pushers and others who sell drugs. DC's rank and file officers supported tougher sentencing in general. In a 1976 survey, they reported lenient sentencing by judges as their top concern. 2 years before Jefferson's historic promotion at the Conference of Black Law Enforcement Officials, the attendees abruptly voted to dispense with the rest of their agenda and dedicate their time to chartering a brand new organization, the National Organization of Black Police Executives, NOBLE. The move was evidence of the progress they had made. There were now enough black police executives to warrant the creation of a formal group. For their founding document, NOBLE's members produced a list of policy recommendations for fighting crime. To be fair, the executives joined many of America's other black leaders in calling for root cause solutions to crime, including socio-economic reform and a healthcare overhaul. But they also demanded a nationwide war on drugs and, yes, mandatory minimum sentencing. In one respect, the century-long fight for police integration has succeeded. Its victory brought a prominent new set of voices to American criminal justice policy, those of the nation's dozens of black police chiefs. But many of these voices would propel, not constrain, an emerging tough on crime movement. Okay, and then that ends part 1, chapter 3, and that brings us on to up to part 2, which is titled Consequences, and that brings us up to chapter 4, which is entitled Locking Up Thugs is not Vindictive. And so let me just momentarily reflect on that chapter, and then after reflecting on that chapter, we probably will go ahead and move sets again here. Just a reminder to people who may not understand why it is that we did move sets. We had a rain was in the forecast, and so we moved to behind the old Chase Bank building to try to just stay out of the rain. We were informed by the people who own or someone who was a representative of the people who own the old Chase Bank building that we were not permitted to have to be set up back there because it was private property. And so we moved to the front of the Chase Bank building center. And, this hits multiple birds, gets killed with this one stone. This gives us a clear eye view into this door where a lot of the city workers go in, and these city workers have been prominent in microaggressions, prominent in weaponizing the police. So it's important that they see us here and feel our presence still here. And also for whoever it is that is the owner of the Chase Bank building, or whoever it is that may have seen us back there, or felt us back there and complained, we just want to make sure that they know that we are still here too. All of this is part of the Say Their Name Square, so we will continue to move sets and to move in different areas. We want to try to get in front of some of these light poles at some point here too. So, but let me just do a reflection on the chapter that I just read out of Locking Up Our Own before I end this here. I gotta go to the bathroom. Chapter 3, Representatives of Their Race, the Rise of African American Police. This was of a time from 1948 through 1978. And this really just spoke about how far back black people were asking for the police departments to become integrated. And it shows you how far back these police departments, what they were originally created for, and how hard they fought against the integration of these police departments, against the integration of these institutions. And then even once these things started to slowly become integrated, once these officers were within these ranks, they faced oppressive and discriminatory actions. They said about how they didn't trust their fellow police officers while they were in the force. And then on the side of that, so that in my opinion, that speaks to the deepness and of the root issues of the reason why just adding more black police officers will not fix this issue. There are some people who they think that is the response. They think that is the answer. And this book right here gives you plenty of information to let you know why just having more representation on the police department of black people will not fix these issues, will not fix these problems. Another thing that they pointed out is that when they were trying to integrate these police departments, it was a lot of community activists. It was a lot of organizational leaders, people who were waging a struggle for black liberation, people who were waging a struggle for black people to have more rights and freedoms in this country. And so their mentality was thinking that police officers black people will become police officers and adopt the same type of mentality that they had, where they would become police officers and be attempting to try to help the black community. They would become police officers and be attempting to try to stop the oppressive and exploitative nature of these police departments. Instead, what happened was black people that became police officers were just as bad as the white police officers, because they did not become black police officers with those type of intentions. They did not enter the force with a hope of waging some type of a struggle or waging some type of or having some type of liberation for black people. They became police officers so that way they could collect a check. They became police officers so that way they could have health insurance. They became police officers so that because in the other lines of work that they felt more qualified for, they were not allowed to have those jobs. They were discriminated against. So when they became police officers, they did not upend the system. They did not change the system. They became part of the system. They submitted. They did not omit from the system. They integrated themselves fully into these institutions. And so as these black people became part of this police force, they began to treat black people sometimes even worse than white police officers were treating them. And here they gave you multiple quotes from different officers in different cities who spoke about a anti-blackness that they felt at that time. And so so then right then they seen early on that just giving black people uniforms and badges and guns was not going to save black communities and poor communities from state-sanctioned violence. Again, it's important for us to note this sentence and this saying, and I hope we never forget it. The individual does not manipulate the system. The system manipulates the individual. individual. If tomorrow night all the white police officers in this city drop dead and were replaced with black police officers, people on the west side of Rockford would still deal with oppressive and exploitative actions from the police department. Black people would still disproportionately be arrested and pulled over by the police department. Black people would still disproportionately be killed and be beat by the police department. There are multiple people on these polls who are black men who were shot and killed by other black men. It is a history of black police officers in this city being just as merciless, just as racist, and just as bigoted as their white counterparts. So that lets us know that simply having representation will not fix these issues, will not change, and will not absolve us of these ills. And so that was something that they touched on and brought up in there. So that was something that I also pulled away from the chapter. One of the things I pulled away from the chapter on top of that too is how long this society and this nation has not cared about the crimes that take place in black neighborhoods, and how much of a straw man, I think that's what it is, a straw man's argument it is when they bring up things like black on black violence, or bring up things like shootings in the inner cities, or bring up things like drug dealing or gang banging in all these cities. When you go back and you trace back crime in black neighborhoods, the further back you go, the more you will see the society and the people who are supposed to be elected leaders and supposed to be in the and are part of these institutions of policing, not giving a damn what happens in these communities, not giving a damn about drugs being sold in these communities, not giving a damn about murders taking place in these communities. And that mind state has festered for year after year and decade after decade, and that is why it's such a high unsolved crime rate, because there has never been any type of genuine effort put forth to take crime out of these neighborhoods, and it speaks about that in here. Another thing that's spoken about in here is the fact that even though black people were asking for integrated police departments, we're asking for more police departments, they were also asking for addresses to the root causes. They never got the addresses to the root causes. We never get the addressing of the root causes. We only get the policing. We only get the prisons. We only get the oppressive things that the government hands out. Not addressing of the root issues and the root problems. And so again, this brings us back to this. This brings us back to that. So yes, it is true that black people ask for more police officers, that black people ask for these things in their communities, but they also ask for other things on the side of that, and they never got those things. In here, they bring up multiple of the Kerner Commission report, multiple of these reports that are done in neighborhoods and in cities after uprisings take place, and each time they say that the root causes of the society is what led to these things, the prejudice, the biasness, the deprivation of resources in the neighborhood, the deprivation of the socioeconomic equity in neighborhoods is what led to these issues, is what led to these uprisings happening. And so those were all the things that I pulled away from that chapter. Origins again, and then even it dates back part 1, origins. And so I think that again, it's important for us to try to understand these issues from as many aspects as possible. I think it's important for us to try to become as informed about these issues as possible. And so I think that we're in a place where each one of these books is dissecting and digging in to these issues at different angles, but each one of these angles is starting to paint a full picture for us. Each one of these angles each one of these vantage points that we are perceiving these things from are giving us a fuller image of the bigger picture. And so we have to continue with those things. So we on pay. Hold on, let me see where we at so I can see. I'm gonna end this real quick, but I want to see where we at, how much we got left. I don't even think it's okay. So all right, we on page 119, part 2, consequences. There's 2 parts to the book. So we've read 3 of the chapters. There's 3 more chapters left in an epilogue. Okay, so I'm gonna end this, and we're gonna figure out what the next moves is from here. Again, the ongoing teaching is Say Their Name Square. Please go back Watch all the videos that we have posted from these last 4 and 5 days of reading. Watch the group discussions. Share the group discussions. We're going to upload those group discussions on YouTube by themselves. But go back and watch these things. Please go out and purchase these books. We're still asking the community to purchase multiples of these books and bring them down here. We asking the community to donate money to the May 30th Alliance Cash App, the May 30th Alliance PayPal, the May 30th Alliance Venmo. We asking community members to come down outside of City Hall and participate in these readings. Come down outside City Hall at 5 o'clock p.m. every day through the month of April and participate in these conversations. Don't mind and don't worry about if you didn't get to hear the book that day or you didn't get to hear anything. We'll do a summarization of the book before we start the conversations. All right, I'm going to wrap this one up. Oh, yep, here we go. There we go. There goes all the information. That's all the information right there. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and then the Cash App, the Venmo, the PayPal. Those the links right there. So shoot anything you got to there. Go to the May 30th Alliance page. Follow the May 30th Alliance page. Like the page. Subscribe to YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. Share all of these things and come out and participate. We outside. All right. I'm gonna end it.